You're listening to Engagement 101 with your host, Karabo Kholeng.
Welcome to Engagement 101, where we look at the role of engaged employees as being core to a successful organization, whether it be a small enterprise, a large corporate, a multinational, an educational institution. We'll be discussing all of that throughout this series of podcasts. My name is Karabo Kholeng, and it's a pleasure to have you on board. CEO Supreme and the author of The Other End of the Telescope, How to Change the Metabolic Rate and Success of Your Business, Ian Russell. Such an honor to have you on the program. Welcome.
Thank you so much, and it's a wonderful privilege to be here.
Now, you've been in senior leadership positions in many organizations, in many parts of the world, and during that time you must have worked out the do's and don'ts of great leadership. But what is it that successful leaders do that sets them apart?
Phew, that's a huge question. I suppose if I was going to single out 2 or 3 key characteristics, great leaders have an ability to be able to use their ears and their mouth in the ratio that they were given them. So they listen twice as much as they talk. Great leaders listen and they understand the need to take in input and feedback and really be aware of what is going around and to be able to take counsel and wisdom from their teams, from their stakeholders, from their shareholders. So that ability to use your ears and your mouth in the ratio that you were given them, I think, is a critical asset of any great leader. I think, secondly, the ability to do as you say and say as you do. Authenticity in leadership comes from what you do, how you behave, not from the words that you use. And if you're not prepared to do the things that you say, to lead by example, then that lack of authenticity becomes a material headwind for any leader who wants to bring a group of people with them. And I think thirdly, and something I've certainly learned over the last few years as I've led large organizations, has been the need to be as clear saying no as you are saying yes. And I would probably go even further and say that a strong no is better than a weak yes. I've seen it a lot where people don't really want to go and do something. They don't necessarily believe in a decision, so they'll give a weak yes. And that weak yes will be characterized by comments like, well, please go and do me another feasibility analysis. I like the idea, but go and talk to so-and-so about such and such. They're ways of prevaricating and delaying the decision. But what it actually does is waste time, and it diverts precious resource away from delivering the most important thing of all, which is business performance. Rather give a strong no. If you mean no, say no and move on. And again, that comes back to the earlier point around the authenticity, say as you do and do as you say, and the ability to listen and reason well. So I think those 3 characteristics are critical for all great leaders to be able to demonstrate.
But what kind of environment would lend itself to the development of that kind of leader?
I think leadership development is a tough subject. And I firmly believe that you only really learn to become a leader when you're finally given the opportunity to be one. It's not like there's a finishing school for leaders. Sure, there are plenty of self-development courses, there are plenty of coaching and mentoring options available to people. But until you've actually sat in the chair and felt the weight and felt finally the understanding of what it means to be the leader, it's very difficult to prepare for it. And organizations that will help you succeed are those that are prepared to scaffold you in that, put things around you that support you, rather than doing what I see happen a lot, particularly in listed companies, where shareholders will be very critical and very quick to criticize the leadership of a new leader coming in. So I think an organization that's prepared to take some time, prepared to create the right supportive environment and allow mistakes and learn from those mistakes is critical. There's a lovely quote from one of the early founders of IBM in the 1940s. And he just found out that one of his employees had cost him a then enormous sum of sort of $400,000. And Thomas Watson, who was the then president of IBM, was asked, "Are you going to fire your employee?" And he said, "No, I've just invested hundreds of thousands of dollars in his training and education. I'm not going to give him to the competition now. So the ability and the wisdom to accept mistakes for what they are and learn from them, from any organization and shareholders, I think is really important.
I want to return to this theme of leaders towards the end of our discussion. But as we're all about employee engagement, let's turn your thoughts to people, the human engine of any business or organization. Ian, you're well known for thinking disruptively about the way that businesses do things. And a few years back, you made the headlines when you tried to break the old style of traditional recruitment using social media techniques. Now, in your new book, The Other End of the Telescope, you write about guerrilla recruitment. Can you elaborate on that? What exactly is guerrilla recruitment?
With pleasure. So a few years ago, I was accountable for the human capital, human resources function of Telkom, which is a large organization in those days, 15, 16,000 people. And the line management within Telkom were complaining of a dearth of young talent that we could bring into the business to change the performance trajectory. And I thought this was a load of nonsense. I was looking around and I said, but why do you think there's a dearth of talent? If I look around, all I can see are bright young things in our economy. We just need to be able to give them the right opportunity. And when I dug deeper, I began to realize that we were unconsciously placing filters in front of ourselves in terms of the way that we were viewing raw talent and young talent. And those filters, I think, become embedded in the culture and the psychology of any economy, any business, anywhere in the world. I don't think it's a unique thing for us in South Africa. And we get rooted by wanting to know whether somebody's got a matric. We get concerned whether somebody has a degree. We want to see something called a curriculum vitae or a resume. And we get put in front of us this data and this screening and this filtering that happens subconsciously. And when you look at somebody's CV, you very quickly see where they were educated, where they may have grown up. Are they black? Are they white? Are they male? Are they female? All this information starts to create a whole series of subconscious screens. And in any case, in this day and age, how close is the connection between raw talent and raw intellectual horsepower and formal education? I have a personal belief that a lot of fantastic intellectual horsepower doesn't get the opportunity to access the education that would allow, if you like, that horsepower to find a gearbox that allows you to create traction. And with that theory in the back of my mind, I said to the team, we're going to run a different recruitment campaign. And there are 3 things that you are going to be banned from using in this campaign. Number 1, you will not be allowed to look at any form of a CV at any stage in the process. Number 2, you will not be allowed to ask for any pieces of paper with regards to qualifications from anybody in the process, ever. Okay? You will never ask for a piece of paper. Okay? And we're never, ever going to ask anybody to do psychometric tests. Because they're another old-fashioned way of recruitment, which have a use, but also have biases and screens and filters that work their way into them. And finally, the challenge was, we're only going to run this campaign online through social media channels. That's the only channel that you can use. So we designed a campaign that went live through a Facebook page that we created just before Christmas a few years ago under a completely separate brand name that we made up called Bright Young Minds. And if you Google it now, you'll be able to find the Bright Young Minds case study out there. And nobody knew when they were applying for these kind of jobs who they were with. And the first thing that we put out on Facebook was a brain teaser, a simple brain teaser that made people think. If you got it right, you could get a click through to another part of a site that asked you 3 more different questions. You got through those questions, and then you said, are you bright enough? Are you a bright young mind? If you are, we have 20 fully funded internship positions for you in a large company, which is listed in South Africa. If you're interested, we want you to answer this question online on video and send us your YouTube video in less than 60 seconds. Then we received those videos. A few of us sat in a room for a couple of days watching thousands and thousands of videos, and we took the 20 best exam questions, brought all the young people to what we called a boot camp, at Telkom, which was the first time they realized this was going to be with Telkom. And we put them through a 2-day process where they were asked to answer other exam questions, stand up and present, and finally address the Telkom Executive Committee itself. And we voted, just like on Pop Idol, there and then on the day, which one of those people we would take and which ones we wouldn't. Every single one of those kids that were at the boot camp got a job with Telkom, a full-blown internship through that. And we never once saw a CV, we never once had a psychometric test completed, and we never once asked them for any formal qualifications. And those young people have become a shining star of talent, a shining capability in Telkom that blew everybody else away. So that's guerrilla recruitment, turning everything on its head and finding a completely different channel and a completely route to market, which was about intellectual horsepower and talent, not about which school you went to and what piece of paper do you have.
That's fantastic. And did it make a huge difference in the organization? And did it disrupt the culture in the organization? Because once you've got these bright young minds in there, is the culture conducive towards keeping them there? So you don't want to experience, a high rate of attrition.
And that's a brilliant question. So that issue of organ rejection, as you bring a young, new, beating, vibrant heart into a tired old body, was something that really worried us. So we did spend some time and some considerable energy trying to make sure that we created a program around the bright young minds, as we called them, that allowed them to enter the system in the right way. I mean, 3 or 4 years later, how many of those young people are still at Telkom? About 60%, which is a high level for any kind of entry-level intake. They are seen as bright young things. They have gone through the ranks very quickly. And the program was successful enough that the managers were clamoring to repeat it the next year and the next year. And that for me was the acid test. Did the organization want me to do it again or not? And it was a resounding yes. So we ran it the second year in a very different way with a different brand name, because once you've done it once, you can't do it the same way again. Yes. But that first year, over 20,000 people went through that Facebook portal, and over 4,000 people sent us YouTube videos answering the exam question, and we hired the best part of 20 people. Those are remarkable numbers for any recruitment campaign.
In conversation with Ian Russell, he is a powerful CEO who's worked around the world for major organizations, and his upcoming book is titled The Other End of the Telescope: How to Change the Metabolic Rate and Success of Your Business.
Have you ever thought about the power of social media? Social media has the power to make your business grow. Grow! Yeah. Why don't you let us manage your social media? Because our business is to see your business grow. Visit us at www.bstylmedia.co.za.
Brandlife.co.za is Thought Leadership Radio. It's a new way to communicate your brand, your value, and what you think about your industry. Be a leader.
You'll never stop at one. I'll take you all on.
Be your voice.
I have a dream.
And we will help you shape your industry. Our radio platform is for thought leaders who want to share insights, businesses who want to create value for their databases, organizations who want to control their message, for those that drive change. Make your brand come alive on brandlife.co.za, harnessing the power of talk radio. Engagement 101 is brought to you by Employee Engagement Awards and Conferences Africa.
This is Engagement 101. My name is Karabo Khuleng, and I am chatting with Ian Russell, the author of The Other End of the Telescope, a really exciting book about how to change the metabolic rate and success of your business. Amazing quotes, really irreverent and funny in parts, but some stuff, that you need to take seriously, because running large, corporations and organizations is not just about, the bottom line, but it's also about people, right? And the people are the drivers of good businesses. And in order to do that, you need a CEO who's really engaged and locked in and is able to think creatively as well when challenges arise. Now, Ian, what are the new challenges and issues for businesses and their employees with the ever-growing trend for virtual offices or location-independent working?
It's a very interesting trend as we see more and more people having more and more technology that they think allows them to become more and more productive. And yet the reality, I don't think that's coming through at all. If anything, we have more and more distraction.
Too many,
right?
Yeah.
You know, I've got a WhatsApp feed of information coming through. I've got email. I've got people who wanted to use that old-fashioned thing called the telephone, wanting to get hold of me. I've got, you know, just the sheer level of disruption, let alone the social media feeds, is massive. And what we're seeing is as people work at home more or in coffee shops more, then that lack of social interaction with peers is beginning to influence their ability to come up with new dynamic ideas and that kind of teaming sphere. So somewhere between the two, there needs to be a balance. I mean, if you go to Cape Town or Sandton or London and New York, all you'll see everywhere are large cranes building very large corporate head offices still. Nobody's stopping building these things.
Exactly.
So what's happening here and where is this disconnect? And what I say in the book, and I think is very important, is that the old-fashioned head office is not really being built for the employee. The bulk of those large head offices in those big fancy cityscapes are being built as a consequence of a CEO or chairman or board or shareholder ego issue. They want to show that they're bigger, they're stronger, they're wealthier than anybody else. They want to put the biggest building up. So a huge amount of the head office issue, I think, is just driven by sheer corporate ego. Secondly, head offices are really convenient places to exercise old-fashioned control and hierarchy. My office is bigger than your office. You're allowed to have coffee in that coffee shop, and I'm allowed to have lunch over here in my restaurant. You're not allowed to go out of that. What you're doing is you're reinforcing company culture, hierarchy, and control, which is really convenient for the senior leadership of a business.
And it's colonial.
Hugely imperial and colonial. I could not
Yes.
agree more. So you're reinforcing the control, the hierarchy, and you're having a big ego contest. So what have you got an office for? The only upside of an office is to create an ability for colleagues to come together to genuinely talk about new ideas and actually for the social interaction, social cohesion.
Yeah.
So my view is that there should be a middle ground here where maybe you have a much smaller, more agile office space that's occupied by one part of your business on a Monday and a different part of your business on a Tuesday and a different one on the Wednesday. And it becomes a much more virtual collaboration space where maybe human resources and marketing are there on the Monday and the next day you've got operations and sales and so on. And you bring people together in that way, but then encourage the distributed working, so use the technology wisely, and stop marking people's input. Because the head office is about saying, did he or she arrive before 8 o'clock? And did they stay until 5 o'clock? I'm marking your input. If you allow people to work freely in a distributed way, you start to mark what have they done. You mark their output.
The output, yes.
And why should I care about whether I've got an employee there for 40 hours? I care whether they delivered the sales target or they've done what I've asked them to do. So it changes the mindset from an input-based to an output-based mindset.
And I like what you say, looking at how to balance that need for personal freedom, but you need social cohesion and, how to best use the workplace space for that. That's a fantastic idea. I mean, and it resonates with me because in the organization where I spend most of my time working, I have an office, but sometimes I go and work in a different space just so that I can engage with people who have different ideas to find out, what do you think about this? And, it's incredibly validating, but it's also, that sense of freedom and it makes you excited and you want to go back to, get back to what you're doing and deliver on what you've promised.
And the very act of standing up and walking around materially increases the flow of oxygen to your brain. Yes. If you increase the flow of oxygen to your brain, it increases the stimulus and its ability to process. You are more productive if you get up and do something different. Just by definition, it's the right thing to do.
It's better to get up than to, check your social media feed.
Absolutely.
Now, you've spoken in other settings about the challenges of blending digital natives with digital immigrants in a workforce. What do you mean by that?
Yeah. So I'm supposed to firstly, these are horrible labels, but somehow you need to characterize some of the challenges that we have. So I have 2 young sons. They're now 9 and 7. And I remember my youngest, when he was about 2, walked up to the television in the corner of the room and without thinking about it, began to touch the screen, assuming that he could move the icons around the television screen, because he'd only ever grown up with a smartphone and a tablet where he could move everything around. He had no such concept of a remote control or a keyboard. That's digital native. That's somebody who just assumes everything's going to work seamlessly and easily in a very digital way. Most of us in the workplace are digital immigrants. We were in the workplace as a lot of this new technology was coming and arriving. So we get it and we understand parts of it, but probably not all of it. So now, as these digital natives grow up and they've only ever known the ability to talk to Siri, the ability to move things around on the screen, the social media feeds, how do you integrate their ways of learning and their ways of doing things with those of people like myself that have got more established sort of ways of thinking about stuff? And it's sometimes very difficult. It's different ways of behaving and thinking. So you're even now getting to a point where there's a generation of folk coming into the workplace for whom handwriting is difficult.
Yes.
It's an undeveloped muscle. Why do you need to write anything anymore? I can dictate it into Siri or I can type it into a keyboard. So if you can't write neatly, I look at what someone's given me on a piece of paper as a digital immigrant and say, hey, that handwriting's horrible. There must be something wrong with that person.
Lack of penmanship.
Lack of penmanship. They might even be left-handed. I mean, disgraceful. So it's about getting across some of those barriers and thinking about these guys and girls do stuff differently. It's every bit as valid, probably more productive than me, but how do we make sure we've got some kind of cultural understanding and integration around that?
Mm. And what do leaders need to do in order to address those kinds of distinctions and issues?
It's like any form of diversity. If you're prepared to embrace and understand the fact that people are different and you encourage that difference in the workplace, you get a stronger company. With diversity comes strength. And I think it's critical. And for me, it's as straightforward as that. It's about an open-minded approach and about encouraging the diversity.
Now, in terms of the role of HR, we can see that the role of HR is changing in the modern workplace. The idea that an HR director can, through policies, influence management style, improve culture, manage workplace issues, is long discredited. And in a book last year, the head of McKinsey commented that HR should have a place at the table equal to with that of the CEO and the CFO, kind of G3, as companies like Aon or Tata and McGraw-Hill have done. What's your take on that idea?
I utterly love that approach. And I think the very fact that HR often gets abbreviated to human remains instead of human resources is a fairly good statement of the issue with the reputation of human resources, capability and functionality in large businesses. From my perspective, we need to genuinely talk about human capital, where that capital is an asset. I was talking to Ian Fuhr the other day, who's the founder of Sorbet, the Sorbet beauty chain. Mm-hmm. And he set up this incredible business, which over the last 10 years has scaled exponentially. And he's done it with an unbelievable focus on his human capital strategy and the way in which he's got the beauticians in the beauty salons themselves to be his brand ambassadors, to live and own the success of the company.
And that's employee engagement.
And it's about employee engagement. And how has he done that? The first thing that he did when he created the balance sheet for Sorbet, he did not allow the accountants to put the cost of people against general expenses, which is what most companies do. He created a whole new set of columns in his accountancy records and so on that talked about wealth creation. And the employee cost, what I would call the employee cost in the old-fashioned world, he calls the wealth creators because they're creating wealth for his company. Now that mind shift, that is a human capital conversation. So think about people expenditure like CapEx, capital expenditure. Have an investment approach and a program around it and really understand that you need to have a long-term horizon around how you look after the people and you make them the center of the company.
Mm-hmm. And then you don't have to worry about, are they here when they're at work? Are they present? Because now they're also producers. They're part of the business. Whereas with the old model, it's like I'm trading my skills, and then according to whatever specs you've given me, that this is your job, and once I've ticked those, I'm done. Now it's you're bringing the individual to be part of the organization. Now, you're going to be giving a keynote at the upcoming Employee Engagement Conference in June. And if there was one key change that you'd like to see business make in this arena of employee engagement here in South Africa or on the continent, what would that be?
That one change for me would be exactly around creating a real understanding amongst shareholders, amongst the board of a company, and amongst the main stakeholders, that capital that you look at as an accountant is only one dimension of the business, and that the human capital that we use to actually really generate the value is equally, if not more, important than the cash. And changing that paradigm and helping the human resources professionals and the human capital professionals really bridge the gap between business strategy and long-term people strategy is a way of changing performance. It's critical for us to really focus on that in June.
And now in your book, on the other side, the other end of the telescope, you talk about how it's lonely at the top, right? What do you mean by, that kind of the loneliness of the long distance CEO, and how did you personally cope with that?
Leadership is lonely. You are, by definition, taking accountability, in my case, for a large piece of machinery in a big organization. And with that accountability comes the need to make the decisions, and they need to be your decisions. So whilst you may take counsel, wisdom, and input from others, ultimately you walk the walk by yourself. And one of the things that I noticed was, whilst you get support around you, the ability to share some of those concerns, to share some of the conversations that you need to be able to have about, am I making the right decision, become very difficult. And you'll see that for a CEO to express vulnerability gets seen as a weakness, because a competitor will say, I can see that CEO is not very sure of him or herself. So expressing the vulnerability in a way which is safe, I think, is something that we need to help CEOs do. And that way they'll get more counsel and support. And with more counsel and support, there'll be a wiser and more rounded CEO. And it's actually the job of the board to think about how they scaffold that CEO to be successful and put more of that support network around them. And I talk in my book about this concept of a personal advisory board for a CEO. Find 4 or 5 trusted people that are nothing to do with your business, but with whom you can talk regularly about different conversations, about different subjects that can guide and advise you. Your board, your proper board, is a governance board. It's going to give you a hard time. But think about a personal advisory board that lean in and support you as an individual.
That is amazing. Ian Russell, thank you so much for your time, and looking forward to the Employee Engagement Conference in June. And I think people will be really excited to hear from you, and hopefully they'll have picked up your book as well. And it's been a pleasure having you on Engagement 101. Thank you
so much indeed. Thank you.
You can follow Ian Russell at Ian Russell SA, or you can also find him on LinkedIn. And for employee engagement matters, including the conference in June, follow at EE_awards on Twitter.
Engagement 101 is brought to you by Employee Engagement Awards and Conferences Africa.